Hello and welcome back to Survey of Biology, Section 13, Unit 13, Section 4. We're going to kind of wrap up our first unit on evolution and talk about survival and reproduction of the fittest. So it's not just enough to survive. Those individuals have to reproduce so that their heritable traits can be passed on to the next generation. So as you look at this picture, I want you to try to decide what do you think is going to happen. Is the water buffalo going to get away and survive to reproduce, or is the lion going to make the kill and eat so that he can reproduce? And so it's really a battle. We talked a little bit about competition, and so there's competitions for resources, and in this case, which animal do you think is going to survive? Because the one that survives is going to be able to reproduce. If the lion doesn't make the kill, he may not have enough food and may not have any offspring. If the water buffalo gets away, it's obviously may be able to survive and reproduce there. So we not only have to survive, but we've got to reproduce to get the genes to the next generation. So what we need to talk about is a thing called evolutionary fitness. So that's the relative reproductive success. So if we have a litter of pups, as the diagram here shows, the tiniest dog in the litter has a reduced differential reproductive success. That is a fancy way to say it's not as likely to survive. Its more robust siblings prevent access to the food that it needs to grow and thrive. So evolutionary fitness is an organism's ability to get to resources so that it can survive. How well is it adapted to its environment so that it can reproduce and get genes to the next generation? So here's an example of some organisms that are very well adapted. So owls, the feathers allow it to have totally silent flight, so it muffles the sound of air passing through their feathers so that they can fly up on prey without being heard. They have very sharp talons. Their necks have a lot of flexibility so they can follow their prey as they move, and you may know that owls can turn their heads almost all the way around. Their large eyes. So these are adaptations that increase the evolutionary fitness of owls to survive. They're very well adapted for their environment. Another example would be the porcupine. It's got long, sharp incisors that never stop growing because it gnaws on the bark. It tries to get to the cambium of the trees. It's got very sharp claws for climbing trees to escape predators. And it also have quills with barbs that will embed themselves in predator skin for protection. So again, its evolutionary fitness is relatively high for that. So they're going to survive and therefore reproduce. So when we look at that in terms of evolution, one of Darwin's famous test subjects were Darwin's finches. And so there was an ancestor of a finch that had a certain size beak that was good for eating certain size nuts. And what happened is as this finch spread out to different islands, the Galapagos Islands, it encountered different environments. And because of variations in that finch population, some had smaller, thinner beaks, some had larger beaks, and you can see what happens is we get something called adaptive radiation. They become adapted to their environment because of variation in the population. Everything from insect-eating birds on the top here with small beaks, woodpecker type for actually boring into wood to get it, and seed-eating with a thicker, more robust beak from there. And so what happens is these organisms may start on the mainland, and as they spread out, they encounter new habitats, islands in this case, and the conditions there, the environment's going to be a little bit different. So certain individuals, because of variation in the population, may be better adapted. And species A may change its gene frequency, its genetic makeup will change and become species B that is no longer the same species as A. And as B distributes to other islands, it may adapt and become species C, which could then migrate back to the original island. And you can see how all of these different variations can lead to many, many different species of finches. The Hawaiian Islands are another example in terms of birds. So there was one kind of ancestral species that made it to the Hawaiian Islands. And then as they radiated out, as they moved into different niches, different habitats, because of variations, some of them became very specialized in terms of feeding on nectar with long curved beaks. Some of them were more for insects and otherwise, and you can see some of them were seeds and nuts with kind of thick, strong beaks. And so you can see how the natural variation in the population led to reproductive success and all the different species of these birds that we see in the Hawaiian Islands from there. And what I'm going to wrap up is just kind of try to go over again. We had talked at the very beginning about the 4 steps, the first of them being overproduction. So in any species, there's got to be overproduction. There's got to be too many individuals than what the resources will support. And in that population, there's always going to be variation. And if you can see right here, we have variation. We have 3 different individuals now. They've got different alleles. And that variation may allow some of them to survive and some of them not. So here is a mutation that was fatal. So that individual isn't going to survive. But maybe there's another mutation, more variation, and we get the blue species here. And what will happen is because of selective pressures, because of selection, certain individuals in the population are going to be better adapted. In this case, the blue bacteria is going to be resistant to an antibiotic. That's the selective pressure that's there. And so the blue ones are the ones that are going to be able to survive and reproduce. And we end up with a population that has a very different genetic makeup. There's more of the blue genes, if you will, in that population. Now, more than likely, the green and the orange genes won't totally disappear from the population. A healthier population has more alleles. But that's the general idea of what happens in evolution, is that the genetic makeup of our final population down here at the bottom is very different than our original genetic makeup, the allele frequency that we saw at the beginning. So hopefully this gives you a good background, an introduction to how evolution works, and we will talk to you soon.